They, as a group, were raised in a time when trust meant something different than it does today, and when people were more trusting. Emotional trauma affects them more deeply, and physical trauma affects them more deeply. And we've had elder victims who have suffered emotional and physical trauma that requires hospitalization. A younger person might go in the hospital and be back functioning in a week, a month. And we've had elder victims go in there for a number of reasons. They go in, they never ever come out. Sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, they're still in the hospital, and sometimes they expire there.
Retirement, the golden years. It's something we all look forward to. Everyone wants to be comfortable and safe after a lifetime spent working and saving and raising a family. Unfortunately, many people over the age of 65 aren't enjoying their retirement. For them, life isn't relaxing, it isn't comfortable, and it certainly isn't safe. For many senior citizens, there will be no golden years. They're victims of elder abuse, an often hidden crime which brings years of pain, fear, loneliness, and tragically, for some, death. Of course, we're all shocked by dramatic news stories of the elderly suffering criminal neglect, ill treatment, or being swindled out of their life savings. But sadly, most elder abuse cases don't hit the headlines. Most incidents go undetected. The victim is not helped, and the abuser goes free to repeat the crime, often against the same victim.
Experts agree that elder abuse is a serious social problem today. But the records show that only a small number of the abuse incidents, particularly those that take place in private homes, are actually reported. Federal officials estimate that this year alone, one of every 20 persons over the age of 65 may become a victim of neglect or a victim of physical, psychological, or financial abuse. One recent study estimated the number of abused elders at nearly 2 million nationwide. Additionally, only 1 out of 14 domestic elder abuse cases comes to the attention of authorities. Therefore, the reported cases probably represent only a small fraction of all abuse cases.
An older adult will actually deny an abusive situation primarily out of fear. They fear losing their independence. There is a certain amount of loyalty to a family member that is almost more important to them than the abuse that they are experiencing.
They fear some sort of retaliation or the withdrawal of friendships or love from the few people that they have in their lives. So they are reluctant to come forward.
Sometimes elder abuse is the result of such factors as caregiver burnout, good intentions gone wrong, physical, psychological, emotional problems of the caregiver, and sometimes just as a result of lack of knowledge of the care that's required for an elderly person. However, elder abuse can be the result of deliberate criminal acts. Unfortunately, there are those people who view elderly people as easy targets.
Elder abuse can happen to anyone, your friends, neighbors, relatives, even to you. It happens in nursing homes, in board and care facilities, but most often in the elder's own home.
Elder abuse occurs mostly in the home, whether that's the victim's own home, in the home of a relative or friend, in a hotel, or in a room and board residence. The typical abused person, statistically speaking, is a 75-year-old white female living alone and generally has a disability.
Adult children, most often sons of the victims, are the most frequent abusers of the elderly. Statistically, they account for about 30% of all abusers. Older people are abused by other family members as well, even by grandchildren. Elders are also abused by friends and neighbors, as well as professional caregivers. The list of abusers is quite long.
Often when an older person's health declines, they tend to become more isolated. It might be that they have an illness or a disability that prevents them from getting out, or it might be that they've lost their mode of transportation, maybe they can't drive anymore. It might be because they're depressed. And it's not just individuals that become isolated, families can become isolated. As the family becomes more isolated, the victim becomes even more dependent on their abuser. Once they become more dependent on the abuser, they're less likely to get out and see other people. They also have a tendency to lose their self-esteem. They may even see themselves as less deserving of better treatment.
An old woman conned into letting her grandson use her ATM card. A grandmother physically and verbally abused by her relatives. An aging parent held prisoner in his own house by grown children who don't care. Elder abuse can take many forms. However, most states recognize 4 general categories. They are physical, psychological, financial, and neglect.
Physical abuse is just what the term says. It's obvious evidence that there's been physical violence or aggression against the person. Things like cuts, scrapes, skin tears, bruises, abrasions, puncture wounds, burns. Those are kind of the obvious things that people look for.
There are certain things within the history that would be very important to look at. For example, a person that comes into the hospital who is brand new to the system, who shows a history of doctor shopping or hopping from various healthcare providers to others. Looking at the medications and how they're being administered to an elderly person is also very important. Both over-medication and under-medication could be a form of abuse.
Sexual assault, the most despicable form of physical abuse, leaves injuries and emotional scars the victim may carry for years. Yet often, because of shame, guilt, or fear, the victim may never be able to discuss this most personal of crimes.
Sexual abuse of the elderly occurs with significant frequency, and I really believe from experience that it may even approach the same frequency as it occurs in the general population. But it's severely underreported. In our experience, elder sexual abuse is one of the areas that is most underreported. Elders have a reluctance to report sexual abuse because it's such a personal crime, and they feel shame, they feel alienated somewhat in terms of discussing those kinds of things. When we do get a report, we frequently find we have to talk to the victim in order to get them to tell us all of the details, just because they're reluctant to tell us, reluctant to let the world know that they've been a victim of sexual assault, that they probably feel that if they were younger, there may be more things they could do to protect themselves.
Psychological abuse is threats, cruel or abusive language, isolation, or the withholding of love and emotional support. This type of abuse can wound more deeply than a beating. It robs the victim of dignity, pride, and self-worth, sometimes even the will to live.
It's a horrible kind of thing that's very debilitating. I remember one lady, about 83, who said, "I wish that they would whip me every day rather than use those words because they hurt so bad." On the other hand, there is the isolation aspect where the family completely isolates the senior. No one talks to them. They have to stay in their room alone, no telephone, no television, eat meals in there alone. They have no part in the family consultation or communication. When we go out and see these people, they're often very depressed, confused, disoriented, hopeless. They've given up. We've even had seniors who saved their medication so they can kill themselves, saying, "Why should I live? No one wants me." The one thing we always need to remember about all of this mistreatment, that it's constant day and night, it's pervasive, it's over and over. And think how we would feel if someone tortured us like that. It's too difficult to deal with alone.
The victim will tell one account of the situation when I'm interviewing them alone, and then when I see them in the presence of the abuser, they will change the story, or they will become silent, will not say anything, will defer to the abuser to do the explaining, or will feign that they don't understand, or that they're confused.
Most times, this caregiver is not a voluntary caregiver. They're caring for the person because they're dependent on them for money, a place to stay, or maybe some kind of emotional support in a weird kind of way. The abuser is often more dependent on the abused person than the other way around. They're often a substance abuser, drugs or alcohol, and many times don't have control over their behavior. They have a poor self-image. They often don't have a job or go from job to job and have a lot of hostility that should be directed somewhere other than on the senior, but they come home, take it out on the senior.
Financial abuse involves stealing money or property from the elderly. But it's really more than that. The victims may lose their homes and all the security they have spent a lifetime building.
Financial abuse, most simply put, is the misuse of the assets or the material wealth of an elder person, a person over 65. On the criminal side, we see many different kinds. Most commonly, we see stealing, robbery, extortion, which is the taking by threat, usually a conditional threat, forgery, which is signing the name of another to a check, credit card fraud, which is basically going shopping with someone else's credit cards without their permission. We see schemes that are perpetrated by people posing as something they're not, and through that scheme getting people to give up their money. We see embezzlement, another very common form. Embezzlement is taking money given to you for one purpose and using it for a different purpose without the permission of the person whose asset it is.
Sometimes some things happen out of the ordinary. An example would be that the neighbors notice that this person is wearing tattered clothing, they are emaciated, may appear to be malnourished. A family member is driving a new expensive car, or at least they have something indicate that they've acquired a sum of money recently.
They will antagonize the parents, harass the parents, threaten them, intimidate them, gain control of their monies, their resources. They will oftentimes isolate the parents so the parents are not able to talk to anyone to report this. They will promise the parent care and protection and to keep the parents from having to go into a skilled facility or a nursing home just in order to be able to control the resources so that they can support themselves.
Indicators that we commonly see in financial exploitation cases include, first, ATM withdrawals at a time when you know the client is non-ambulatory, can't get to the bank to do an ATM withdrawal. A credit card slip or check with a signature that you know doesn't match your client's signature, or the same kind of documents signed at a time when the client was incapable of signing, or anything else that you know is inconsistent with the way the client lives, their activity level, or their abilities.
To some small extent, we're probably all guilty of unintentional neglect. But criminal neglect means more than just forgetting a birthday. It's a systematic, callous assault on the health, welfare, and dignity of another human being. denied proper food or adequate medical care, or simply just abandoned to waste away in an unclean, unsafe, empty house, when all else is gone, how long before the will to live is lost?
Severe neglect is abuse. In cases where a person is not cared for, they're bedridden, they have decubitus ulcers, that is a sure sign of neglect. And of course, that is, when it gets to that point, that is abuse. Neglect means a negligent failure of a caregiver to provide that degree of care which a reasonable person would provide. This includes failure to assist in personal hygiene, failure to provide food, clothing, shelter, or medical care, and/or failure to protect an elderly person from health and safety hazards. Abandonment is also neglect. Abandonment occurs when a caregiver deliberately deserts an elderly person.
When people tend to think of elder abuse, a lot of times they think someone's taking Granny out into the backyard and working her over with a lead pipe. It doesn't happen very often that way. Kinds of things that tend to happen are the elderly, particularly if they're physically frail and can't move around, they will not be able to maintain proper hygiene. They will become unwashed. Bed sores or decubitus ulcers are very common in the neglected patient who cannot physically take care of themselves. If these become deep enough, they can become quite severely infected and need to be repaired surgically. This is the kind of horror story we see over and over again in the emergency room, where someone thinks that they can just leave Grandpa in bed for weeks at a time and not bother with him, and then they finally pull the covers back and realize that, Grandpa's falling apart, and they drag him in.
We must all take part in the prevention of elder abuse. First, by learning to recognize the signs, and then knowing where and how to report. You and I, that's who needs to help. We are the ones who must be the lifeline our senior citizens so urgently need. To report elder abuse is simple. The Ombudsman's Office investigates all reports of abuse in nursing homes and board and care facilities. Abuse elsewhere should be reported to the Adult Protective Services Agency. But if you suspect elder abuse, don't hesitate. Report it immediately to any police or sheriff's officer. They will notify any other agency which may need to be involved. In California, those who have special legal responsibilities to the elderly are called mandated reporters. As a mandated reporter, it is your duty to protect the health, safety, and well-being of California's elderly citizens. It is your responsibility to recognize the signs of physical abuse and to report. Although mandated reporters are not legally required to report other types of abuse, the welfare of a frail elderly person may depend on you alone.
The California Welfare and Institution Code is quite clear as to who is a mandated reporter. These mandated reporters include care custodians, healthcare providers, county adult protective services workers, and designated employees of local law enforcement agencies.
A care custodian is an employee of a public or private agency whose duty is to assist with social services. A health practitioner is a person who provides medical services to an elder. Designated employees of adult protective services agencies are persons usually employed in county welfare organizations who provide services to elders in the course of their duties. Designated employees of local law enforcement agencies refers to police, sheriffs, or county probation officers who serve elder clients.
A mandated reporter is not a judge or jury. All that is necessary is to notice the signs and symptoms and to report. Report what you see, what you hear, what you smell. And don't delay. A prompt report can mean the difference between life and death.
Mandated reporters must report suspected cases of physical abuse immediately by telephone. Within 2 working days, they must fill out Form SOC 341. The instructions for reporting and cross-reporting are found on the back of that form. Law enforcement officers commonly use Section 242 of the Penal Code for the crime of battery and Section 487 of the Penal Code for the crime of theft perpetrated against elderly people. However, Section 368 of the Penal Code is also usable for charging these same crimes or any other crime perpetrated against an elderly person. In fact, Section 368 of the Penal Code is the only section that applies to the crime of criminal negligence, which may be perpetrated against the elderly person.
As a mandated reporter, your confidentiality will be respected, and you are protected by the law against any action which may result from your report. But the law also deals strictly with mandated reporters who fail in their duty to report.
Failure to report can result in a fine, imprisonment, or a combination of those.
With our rapidly increasing elder population, society cannot afford and should not tolerate this rising tide in elder abuse. Currently, laws exist to protect the elderly, to guarantee quality care, to rescue and protect them from abuse and neglect.
My parents' generation lived through the Great Depression. They fought in World War II. They sustained us through the Cold War. They helped build a better life for all of us in California and the nation. And now when they're at their most vulnerable in their elder years, it really is important that we do what we can to make sure they're protected from those predators and those abusers. In fact, when you think about what they've done for us and what they face today, it seems to me that it's got to be among our highest priorities to protect them from elder abuse.
Statistics show that we are all living longer, healthier lives. As a result, the elderly have become the fastest growing segment of our population. The golden years, we all have a right to enjoy them. Our society has the medical skills, social services, and the laws necessary to protect the health and welfare of older Americans. But alone, that is not enough. I'm asking for your help. As friends, family members, neighbors, we can truly make a life-saving difference for many elderly citizens. Together, we can be a lifeline.
The criminal justice system, working through law enforcement and prosecution, has an important role to play in helping to stop the problems of elder abuse. And by doing those roles effectively, we can achieve the following. First, we can communicate a message to the offender that the conduct is criminal and must be stopped. We can protect the victim through a series of procedures, such as stay-away orders. We can attempt to gain restitution for the victim, either for medical bills, for shelter, for counseling. We can protect the public because there are many secondary victims who suffer. As a prosecutor, one of the things that I hear a lot is that criminal justice and prosecution isn't doing enough in the area of elder abuse. We aren't doing enough, but it's because of many things. The most important is that we aren't seeing enough cases. My pitch, my plea, is help us in prosecution to more effectively protect the victims of these terrible crimes, whose lives, whose final days are days of terror and sadness. Help us by bringing us the cases, by coming forward and being witnesses, and by being fair to the victims who've suffered in silence for so long.